Hey, this is John. Thanks for joining me for this video today. A few weeks ago, I did a video, kind of a nostalgia piece about my first model, Lindbergh P47, which is still one of my all-time favorite kits from building and playing with it as a kid. And I really noticed that kind of struck a chord with people. There were a lot of people, especially my age group, but not exclusively, who kind of related to that, of getting that first model kit when you were a kid and building it and thinking about, you know, it just caused me and other people to think about what was that like getting that first kit, remembering the first kit, remembering starting this hobby as a kid. And it got me to thinking about that one of the things that I think is really important in any hobby, because if you think about it, our hobby is really part of a culture. It's not, you know, opera, and it's not language, and it's not all of those other things that we think of when we think of culture, but it's a little piece of it. It's a bit of creativity that has come about over the last 50, 75 years where, you know, little kids get introduced to taking pieces of plastic and gluing them together and painting them and taking them out in the backyard and going, anyway, you get what I mean. It's something that's a part of our culture. And in that regard, it's worth protecting. It's worth passing along. Now, just to show a few of the other kits that I had growing up. Now, in these kits, these are not the originals. I don't have anything from when I was modeling as a kid, not anything. But I have gone out and found some of my favorite kits on eBay. And one of those was this Ogawa Mig25. And if you're old enough to remember when this thing landed in Japan, when the pilot defected and landed in Japan, if you're younger, it was back during something called the Cold War. It's on Wikipedia. Anyway, when this thing landed in Japan, it was big news. And so Ogawa pretty quickly jumped on this, got really accurate and detailed measurements of the real thing. And the next thing you know, there's a model kit out. And I loved this as a kid because it not only was something I could build, but it was something I'd seen in the headlines. It wasn't just something from the past that I saw people talking about, but I could look at this and go, wait a minute, I remember seeing this in the news a few months ago, and now I can build it. So there's that aspect to the hobby, that it's not just a creative process, it's tying it to events and places and things. Even if they're events within media, you know, this was a real thing, obviously. But when you're building a Star Wars kit, you're thinking back, you're relating to that bit of culture that was the movie. So there's a lot that helps someone who's new to the hobby, especially someone who's younger, to kind of relate to the world around them. A perfect example from my own youth of something relating to media and history and all kind of being wrapped up in one. And if you're my age, you're gonna know this one. Was the Revell Baba Black Sheep. I have to hold it up like this. The Revell Baba Black Sheep Corsair. This was like a holy grail kit when I was a kid. It still is. This is one that some friends kind of cobbled together from bits and pieces from various Baba Black Sheep kits. It's got the whole model in it, the instructions, the decals, the box, everything. And when I was a kid, I loved this show because every week I'd get to see Corsairs and Zeros and all of these things just swooping around the sky and flying around and dogfighting, and you know, the characters who were so heroic to me and just seemed so cool, you know. I mean, it took me years to figure out that Robert Conrad wasn't Pappy Boyington. I just thought, when I first saw a picture of the real Boyington, I was like, that's not Boyington. But the fun of building connected me to the fun of watching that show, of watching that media. We call it now consuming media, of consuming media, and also tied it to the history. And again, it was all real important for me as a kid to make all of these connections. Now, fast forward a few years, and I'm a dad, and I've got a son. And when I got back into modeling in 2006, he was already a little older. He was early on in high school. But when I got into it, he wanted to get into it. And one of the things he built, I still have his models, one of the things he built was this Messerschmitt 109, which was his favorite airplane. This is, if you're wondering, this is the 21st century kit. You remember those? You get them from Walmart. They were like 10 bucks each. Great little kits, big kits. He painted this in his school colors and even put his jersey number on the side. He played on the football team. That was his jersey number. This was his build. And we got to spend time talking about building and the techniques of building and what colors to use on the airplane. And he told me about his concept for doing this and how would it look. And so it was really a great process that went beyond just building the model. It was a point of interaction for us. It was a point of discussing history and how it intersected with his world and what a lot of it meant, and personalizing it. That no, this is not the way it would have been back then, but if this is what you want to do and you think it's cool, go ahead and do it. It was a great experience, and I've still got a shelf full of models that he built, and every one of them is a great memory. Now he's grown up, moved out, but he got married, and now he has a son. And I'm hoping one day that I can model and build things with my grandson. I'm looking forward to that because I think it's a beneficial thing to pass along. Now, I'm no educator. I don't claim to be. I never played one on TV, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So if you're an educator and you think, this guy's not completely right, you're probably right, because this is not an area of expertise I have. But looking back on my own experience modeling, watching my son's experience, seeing friends and how they experienced it, I think there's some positive things that can come from introducing model building to younger people, to a new generation. I think one of the biggest things it does is it teaches something tangible that they can put their hands on and they can complete. There's a lot of things in this world that kids do now, and I sound like an old guy when I say it that way. You kids, get off my lawn. There's a lot of things that kids do in this world now, and I'm not downing these things. I understand, I still do some of these things myself, but like with games on the phone or on the PlayStation or other things like that, those games, they can enjoy them, and there can be a learning aspect to them. There can be a socialization aspect to them. But when you're done, there's nothing tangible. There's nothing, I mean, you might say that I scored, I scored the highest score on Frogger, something like that. That can be kind of cool to brag about with your friends, but you don't have anything to show for it. With building models, you have something to say, here's what my work did. In their minds, especially when they're younger, it connects working with something beneficial being derived from it. That connection is really important, I think, for a kid to have, especially early on, to see that, okay, I can do something. I can take all of these parts and I can put them together and I can hold it. There's a benefit to that. Another thing that's very important is it's an opportunity, and I've kind of alluded to this, it's an opportunity for education. When I was growing up, I built all sorts of different models, but eventually by late elementary school, I had pretty much settled on aircraft, particularly World War II aircraft. And I got to where I liked going to the school library and reading about things that these airplanes participated in. It prompted me to learn about the Battle of Britain, to learn about the air war over Europe, the air war over the Pacific, the air battles that were fought, the personalities that were in these. In fact, it was my interest in that prompted me to start paying attention to some of those old guys that my dad, who was a private pilot, pay attention to some of what those old guys started telling me, because they had flown in these battles. And I got to stand there and listen to them, and they would tell me, I would show them. I remember one in very specifically, I showed him my P-51 Mustang that I'd built. And he picked it up and was telling me, you know, how nice it was and how I'd, you know, gotten some details right. And, you know, here's something you might change. Just some nice things that you tell a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid. But then he picked up another model off my shelf, and he started telling me about some of the air battles he was in, and he was using these models to demonstrate this. And even at the time, I didn't have a full comprehension of the weight of all of this. But I look back on that and I thought, you know, there was somebody who was there in those things, in those places, in those battles. And he's describing to me, you know, and then I did this and I zoomed up, and then he turned and came back down, and I was expecting that, so I kept going up, and then I waited and I turned and I went down on him. It was an amazing thing to be involved in. So there is a tie to history or perhaps culture. You know, not everybody's going to model a World War II model airplane. Somebody might want to model race cars, which they have a place in history. Someone may want to model something that was part of a movie, and that has a place in our popular culture. So modeling helps tie a kid and their thinking to the things around them, the people around them, to see the bigger picture, to see there's a bigger world out there, and here you can kind of hold a piece of that in your hand, and it gives them something to think about. Now, I'd mentioned at the start of this part of the video, I'm no educator. One thing I know for sure though, building models is a problem-solving skill. It really helps someone to see, okay, I have a box of parts. How do I get to that tangible place where I have something to hold? And a kid, heck, even an adult, I still do it, has to think, put their mind to work to say what is going to be the best way to do this. The first time you build a model, you just kind of slap it together. But you see, well, there may be some better ways of doing this, and you learn, well, I know I need to paint this first, but then I've got to do this, and then how do I do that? And it starts making these connections. And those connections don't just apply to our hobby. Those connections, as they start making them, they're learning a process of problem solving and logical thinking and getting to a conclusion, getting to a good result. And let me tell you, as someone who has spent a lot of time hiring people for my day job, I can't tell you the number of people who sit before me at times that while they may be nice people, fine people, intelligent people, if they can't solve problems, if they can't take the task that they're assigned and get it to the end without holding hands a lot of times, they're less employable. In my job, I can't hire someone that I have to watch all the time. So when a kid is able to make these connections, is able to learn problem solving, is able to learn how to overcome obstacles, all of these things, they're building a foundation that as they go forward in life is going to help them in so many ways. And it's not just, hey, they're spending time building models. But if you're really encouraging them and you're really working them through it, it's going to set them up with a life skill that's going to magnify itself far beyond just the simple matter of gluing things together. Of course, one of the things that I think was so fun about building models, both with my dad when I was young and with my son when I was older and he was building models, is it gave us a time to connect, to share, something we could both enjoy, something we could have fun at. You know, where you had those, hey dad moments, and hey son, look at this. Those moments are priceless. Now that he's moved half a country away and he's doing his thing with his wife and his son, and he's got his life, I look back on that, and those are some of my treasured memories, because we were doing something together. We were having a good time, and it was all based around this hobby that we love. Okay, hopefully I've kind of made a case that this hobby is worth passing along to. So the next question is, well, who do you pass it along to? Well, certainly it can be your son or your daughter, your niece or your nephew, but it can be that kid across the street. It can be a kid who you don't even know. Maybe you contact a local youth organization and say, hey, I build these plastic models and I would love to, start a club that kids could come in and do this, and they could learn about it, and it could be a great point of interaction with them, with someone who's a great role model, and they could really have fun with it. So it can be passed on to anybody. You don't have to just limit it to family. Certainly if you've got kids that are of age to do it, that's an easy, I guess you'd say, target audience. But think outside of those bounds. Think outside of the walls of your house and think, who can I make a difference in their life? Because when you're talking about all of these skills and the interaction and all of these things that I've been discussing, that's really what's happening. You're making a difference in a young person's life that can have long-term, profound, positive impact for them. Okay, so what are some practical aspects of it? Well, first of all, I would say emphasize the fun. One of the easiest ways to get kids engaged in something is that, hey, this is fun. I remember when my kids were real little, I would find ways to make games of cleaning their room. I would pit them against each other. See who can clean their room the fastest. And all of a sudden, the thing that they don't want to do, which is clean the room, all of a sudden they're all about cleaning the room because they want to be the one who finishes first. So we would get the rooms cleaned. But when a young person thinks something is fun, if you demonstrate that it's fun, if you demonstrate that you're having a good time with it, and they see, yeah, I could buy into that. I think that does look like fun. When they do it, they're going to have fun with it, and they're going to be engaged, and now you've got something to connect on. So emphasize the fun aspect of this hobby. Now, while you're emphasizing the fun aspect of it, do not worry about the little things. If they want to do something a certain way, or if something is not accurate or canon or whatever, let them explore. Let them do what they want to do with it, because that's what's going to engage them, and that's what's going to engage that fun aspect to it. If you tell them, hey, this is a lot of fun, and then they start doing it, and you start telling them, no, don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. They're going to go, this isn't fun. And I'm not talking about, you want to make sure that they understand, okay, to successfully put this together, you have to follow the instructions, at least a little bit. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. If they want to build a World War II tank and paint it purple, let them paint it purple. It won't hurt anything. Focus on the positive aspects of it and don't sweat the petty stuff. Another great thing that building models of any type gives a kid a chance to do is it encourages their creativity. I think about the Messerschmitt that I showed earlier. My son looked at that and he wanted to do something different. I remember he put a little bit of thought into it. And he said, hey, I think I'm going to put my number on the side and I'm going to do it in my colors from my school, so it's got my jersey number on the side and it ties to where I'm at in life right now. And I thought that was wonderfully creative. He did that in a lot of his models. He built a drone that had just this obscene amount of bombs hanging off of it, and he put a giant Gatling gun sticking out of the nose. It was completely it would have been completely unable to fly. I mean, it was aerodynamically ridiculous, but it looked so cool. Other times he decided that he wanted to build, it was a little Lee tank, and he wanted to stick a whole bunch of rocket launchers on the back of that. And the rocket launcher thing itself was darn near as big as the tank, but it looked so cool. But it let his creativity come out. That's something that I remember from modeling as a kid too, is I always liked painting. I always liked art stuff. And as I grew in my modeling, it encouraged the creative side of me to figure out how paints and colors and all sorts of things work together and come up with solutions for problems. So encourage the creativity, even if it takes the model in a different direction than maybe the real thing is. Encourage that creativity. At the same time that you're encouraging creativity, you can really focus in on skills, because those skills not only have a big picture aspect, the whole problem solving thing and all of that, but as they're learning, say when they're learning to glue things together. I remember I used to get that, you remember the Testor's orange tube glue? Oh, that stuff was horrible. You'd get it everywhere. And I remember I'd beat it along the whole edge of the fuselage all the way around. And then I'd stick the parts together and there would just be glue everywhere. And I'd get it on my fingers and I had thumbprints all over my models, you know. And one day my dad showed me, he said, why don't you take a little bit and put it out on this little piece of tile that he gave me. Put it on there and then take a toothpick and just lightly rub that on there. And he showed me a method that I still use today. He had me put it on either side, and then I put the two together and squeezed it, and it made a little bead of plastic. And then I could go back later with my very dull hobby knife that he let me have, and I could gently scrape that down. That's still something I use today. But channeling a kid into good skills is going to help them, again, with the whole problem solving thing, but it's going to help them enjoy the hobby, because one of the things that brings pain into the hobby is not being able to execute in plastic what you see in your head. But when you're building up these skills, they're able to conceptualize, visualize what it is that they want to do, and then execute it on the model, because you've channeled their skills into knowing how to solve the problems. Now this next suggestion, this can be a hard one to know when to do, but I think it's a very important one. And it not only applies in modeling, but in life in general. You have to know when to let them fail. Now, I'm not talking about if, you know, they're real little and they're trying to get parts off of a sprue and they're having a hard time with it. You show them how to do it. But sometimes as a kid gets older and they're doing something in the hobby and they're trying something out, having the wisdom to know when to step back and let them deal with it is going to have great benefit for them down the road. Because some of the best lessons we learn in life are through failing, not necessarily through success. And so knowing when to step back and say, you can figure this out. And they may beat their head against the wall and beat their head against the wall, but that moment where they emerge through a few failures and suddenly go, I get it. Now I know how to do it. That is such an accomplishment for them, and it teaches them to stick to it, to apply the brain that they have in their head to solving these problems. And it really teaches them that sometimes in life you're going to fail. Some of the worst employees I've had over the years, and also just observing people in the world in general, are the ones who have always been told everything you do is just great, and they never learn how to deal with failure. And then they get into business, they get into programming, they get into sales, they get into whatever career they're going to be in, and they run into a failure, and they think that failure defines them, and they don't know how to deal with it. Letting a kid fail at model building is one of those foundational skills that will help them way down the road and will magnify itself far beyond just the plastic. Another thing you can do, and this gets outside of necessarily, you know, the kids in your house or the kids in your neighborhood. But when you're in social media kind of settings, be an encourager, especially with young modelers or new modelers, because trust me, we have all seen it. There's plenty of people out there on socials that are perfectly willing when somebody puts up their first model and says, hey, what do you think of this? And they go, it looks awful. There's plenty of people that are willing to say that. Be an encourager. It doesn't mean that you have to give somebody unwarranted pats on the back, but you can look at it and go, I mean, maybe the best you can say is, hey, did you have fun with that? And they go, yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. Encourage them in the fun. Develop a relationship. That way, the next time they may say, well, yeah, I had fun with it, but how could I have improved this? By being an encourager, you let people know, one, that you've seen their work and you're genuinely happy for them, but two, you're developing a trust relationship. And they can think, you know, I can trust this person. Getting the trust of, especially with a kid, getting the trust of a kid is huge, especially if it's, you know, certainly if it's not your own child. I mean, hopefully your child trusts you. But if it's, say, a kid in the neighborhood that you're trying to help with some stuff, and they see, you know what, this person, we tend to overuse this word now, so I'm hesitant to use it, but this person is safe. I can show them and I can ask them questions and they're not going to make fun of me. They may not, you know, they may not just tickle my ears all the time, but they're going to, if they give me criticism or if they tell me ways I can do things, it's because they have my best interest in mind. So be an encourager. Another way that you can do this outside of your own four walls is if there's a local model club or some kind of modeling group or anything like that in your area, then be proactive in that. Don't just fall into what here in the U.S. tends to be a pattern of it's all about the contests. It's all about winning trophies. You know, honestly, I get so tired of people worrying about the trophies. Worry about having fun. When you worry about having fun and doing your best, the trophies will come. And when you're talking about growing the hobby and being proactive in your local community, that modeling club, that's the message to send there, to get in there, to bring in new people, to get them going in the hobby, to get them going in the fun. Yeah, there can be the competitive aspect of it, but establish a firm foundation that they can build on. Because remember, if you're one of the old guys like me, we ain't going to be around that much longer. If we really love this hobby, we can be involved in our local community to grow it. That's real important. And a final thing in looking at ways of doing this, and this isn't something I say that's external, but this is something internal. Don't forget the shoulders you stand on. And by that, I mean, when you're looking at whether it's your own child's model or somebody who's new to the hobby and you're thinking, I can do better than that. Well, number one, if you've been building models for a while, I hope you can do better than that. But remember, you didn't start being on top of the heap. You didn't start being an accomplished modeler. You didn't start with all of these skills. Everybody starts at model number one. I don't care who it is. It can be somebody who's just starting out that you may encounter on social media, or you can talk about guys like Shepard Payne or Ko Yokoyama or any of those guys like that. All of the big names we see in our hobby, they're all people who at one time started with one model, and there was probably somebody in their life that said, hey, that looks good, but do you know there's a different way to do that? Let me show you that. Just like my dad showed me with using a toothpick to apply glue. Everybody has to start at model number one. Don't lose sight of the fact. Don't believe your own press. Because I can say this safely because I know it's true, because it applies to me and it applies to every modeler I know. None of us is as good as we think we are. So put a little humility into play and help people along, and remember the shoulders that you stand on to get where you're at. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've found this useful and maybe thought stimulating. I know this is not one of those videos that as soon as you get done watching it, you go back to the workbench and say, I'm going to try that. It's a little more nebulous than that. But I think as people who enjoy and love this hobby, I think it's incumbent upon us to help pass that on in any way we can, whether it be through doing something with your kids, with other family members, neighborhood kids, community groups. Maybe it's on the internet. You know, I feel like the way I can contribute back for all the people who've helped me along the way is through these videos. This is how I engage. This is the way I think I can best help out passing on the hobby, passing on the fun of the hobby, the joy of the hobby, and the skills of the hobby. So I hope this video has given you some food for thought to think about in ways that you can contribute. And if you're already doing that and you're enjoying it, keep doing it. Don't get worn down. But if you're like a lot of modelers, especially guys that are my age, if you're just sitting in the house building models and you're not giving anything back, maybe stop and think, how can I give something back? Maybe it's only making a difference in one person's life, but that one difference can mean all the world to them. So it really does have value. Well, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you're still watching at this point. I've tried to keep it focused on the topic, but there have been a couple of times that I've thought, you're starting to sound like an old man ranting at the kids in the front yard, and I don't mean to. So if you're still watching, thank you for hanging in all the way to the end. I appreciate it. And I always love it when somebody lets me know, hey, I watched the whole video. So I tell you what, in fact, if you watch the whole video, just put one comment down below. Nothing else, no explanation. Just put crazy old man. That's it. Let me know. That'll let me know who's watching till the end. I always have fun doing that. So thank you for watching. Another thing you can do that'll really help me out as I try to grow this channel is to hit that subscribe button down over there somewhere, and that's going to help me out. It really does. As I try to grow the channel, I'm trying to get noticed by YouTube. That's part of being a creator on YouTube, is fighting the YouTube algorithm. The more subscriptions, the more likes, the more watches, the more it helps me out. If you can subscribe, hit the little bell icon, like this video, and share it. That would really do a lot to help me out, and I would be most grateful for it. There's also links down below to all the social media platforms that I'm on, and a link to my blog. So if you're on one of those social media platforms, or if you like reading blogs, then please check that out. In fact, on my blog, I've been blogging for many more years than I've been doing video. So there's quite a few articles out there. So if you've never checked out my blog, go take a look at it. You might find something interesting. There's also a link down there to Patreon. Patreon is how I support the hobby. I would not be able to do the hobby the way I do it, at the pace I do it, with the materials I do it, if it weren't for Patreon. I would still model, but we just wouldn't be able for me to afford to do it in the way that I do it. So Patreon makes that happen. And if you have the ability, and you also feel like it would be worthwhile supporting me in my efforts, then I would be most grateful if you would take a look at the links, take a look at the tiers that are offered there and the benefits for each tier, and see if there's something that you might enjoy. And of course, if you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for that. It really does mean a lot to me and my family. It makes the difference, like I've said, with me being able to do this, and I am so very grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you for supporting me in this work that I do. And finally, like I say at the end of every video, but at this one it's really important to say, if you're not having fun in this hobby, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.